Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our October meeting. It's been a very busy fall so far. Your council has had 2 meetings and is dealing with a number of issues. But first, I want to offer congratulations to the Murney Tower curator, Simge. Simge has recently become Dr. Simge and completed her PhD. Congratulations to her. We are very, very lucky to have such an incredible person leading the activities at what has come to be known this summer as one of the most successful museums during this past tourist season. Some of the other things that the board is doing is we're looking ahead for February Heritage Month to look at our heritage event. There'll be more information coming forward on that. There is a Halloween event coming up on Saturday at the Murney Tower. You will be able to find that information on our website. We're also calling for volunteers who might be interested in helping organize our 100th anniversary, an incredible achievement for any museum. I also want to congratulate Warren Everett, one of our council members, who has been recognized by the Ontario government with a 20-year pin for his volunteerism. Congratulations, Warren. Membership is open on the website. If you are so moved to start looking at your membership for next year. We are very secure financially, thanks to Peter Ginn, our treasurer, who keeps us on our toes on what we are spending. And we have reserves in place now that we never used to have, and it will help us get through some of those drier periods. One of the things we're also dealing with is changes as an organization under the new Ontario Not-for-Profit Act. These have to be in place by October of 2024. And as I'm sure many people on this call, as I know I've gotten older, time seems to fly even quicker. So that will be upon us very soon. So that's just a couple of updates from the council. I'm very much looking forward to hearing Christopher West, who I served on the Marine Museum board with. And he has always been inspirational, and I considered him one of my mentors in my work with not-for-profit organizations. And with that, I'll turn it over to Duncan to properly introduce Christopher West. Enjoy the program.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you very much, Paul, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second fall lecture. On Monday, God and the weather willing, the waterfront of Kingston will look considerably different. Sometime around noon on Monday, we're told the SS Keewatin will arrive as the new museum ship for the Great Lakes Museum. And that will be a day that I think will be in tune with the whole history of Kingston. Since the beginning, Kingston has been oriented to its waterfront. Our native peoples came down here in the summer, down the river to be by the side of the lake. The first steamship in central Canada, the Frontenac, was built on the shores out near Bath. The 19th century is punctuated by transshipment companies, grain companies, coal companies, all focusing on Kingston's strategic position at the head of the Great Lakes. So tonight we are very welcoming to have Chris West with us, who is the chair of the recently renamed Great Lakes Museum, and he may talk about the strategic purpose behind that. Now, Chris is a Kingston native, gone to Queen's, got a BA in arts at Queen's, but began his business career at the other end of the St. Lawrence in Montreal, where he worked in the financial sector for many years. And then he came back to Kingston in 2006 to establish a beachhead for his financial company here, and has been here ever since. Not only prominent in the financial sector, but prominent in the voluntary section. He has been the chair of the Great Lakes Museum since 2011, and has in many ways spearheaded that organization's drive to bring the Keewatin here, which will become, I'm sure, a major tourist magnet in this country and in this town. So without further ado, I'll call on Chris to come up and tell us a little more about this magnificent ship.
Thank you very much, Duncan, Mr. President, and thank you all here before me and those who have joined us remotely. I'm a first timer here. It's a great privilege, and I'm very excited to be with you. Thank you. Right off the top, I must offer the following cautionary note on your speaker. I see that you are accustomed to hearing from very learned students of the past. Please be forewarned, I am not an historian. There's not an academic bone in my body, and there will be no footnotes to this talk before, during, or after. I will, however, do my best to impart some stories about the Marine Museum, now the Great Lakes Museum, as you've just heard, and the Keewatin. More about that pronunciation later. We're going with Keewatin. Is that better?
Yes, it is.
In hopes that some bits and pieces will be new to you, or at least moderately entertaining. The title of this talk is The SS Keewatin Comes to Kingston. But there's a long story behind that, and a long story to follow, I hope. To set the scene, we're going to quickly review some history of the museum and the site it occupies, and because I know it best, my personal interconnection of that history. Let's begin. In 1890, before he died, Prime Minister Sir John A. Macdonald dropped his final patronage plum on his home riding of Kingston and the Islands. It was a state-of-the-art dry dock and steam-powered engine house to pump it dry. Its purpose would be to service ships, at that time still the primary mode of moving goods in North America. And you heard from Duncan how critical Kingston's role in the world of nautical commerce was at that time. It served its role faithfully until the construction of the Seaway in the late 50s, when larger locks ushered in a new generation of ships that were too long for the Kingston dry dock to accommodate. They steamed right on by. By 1968, the Kingston dry dock was officially decommissioned and essentially abandoned. It was still a federal property, but it no longer served a purpose. Meanwhile, in the early 70s, a loosely connected group of local Kingston scuba divers was beginning to discover and explore the treasure trove of shipwrecks in the Kingston and area waters. What they found fascinated them. Soon they were bringing up to the surface a cornucopia of material, everything from ship's bells and binnacles to teacups and taffrails. Some of these items were ending up on mantelpieces and some in flea markets. It occurred to the more enlightened among the divers that these haphazard outcomes were perhaps not in the best interest of preserving our underwater heritage. They got together and said, we have to find a secure place to store and display this stuff. It could be a museum. One thing led to another, and the federal government agreed to lease their now derelict Kingston dry dock site for $1 a year. And the Marine Museum of the Great Lakes at Kingston was founded, born in 1975, right there. Through a lot of love and devotion and generous donor support, it quickly became another mainstay of the Kingston Museum scene. By 1986, the museum had what all maritime museums aspire to: its very own museum ship, the retired Coast Guard service vessel and icebreaker, the Alexander Henry. Residing in the dry dock, it became the museum's most popular attraction. As many will recall, It was even operated as a popular bed and breakfast for many years. By 2010, however, something was amiss in this happy story. It turned out that despite the seeming success of the museum, it was in rather desperate circumstances. Put plainly, the museum was not making enough to pay its bills. Staff were let go, the ship and the museum were closed, and grant funding was coming to an end. What to do? As you've heard, I work in the investment business. There's an old saying among cavalier investors: don't worry about paying too much for your shares. There's always a greater fool who will take them off your hands. Well, I was the greater fool who was approached to join the museum board in 2010. I have the late and inestimable John Wilson and Tony Hutton to thank for their grand seduction. It worked, and I signed on. Only then did I realize the extent of the peril the museum was in. In balance sheet terms, we were insolvent. As Dr. Johnson said, though, depend upon it, sir, when a man knows he's to be hanged in a fortnight, it concentrates his mind wonderfully. Suffice it to say, we concentrated wonderfully and rallied from the brink. 2011, we had a new business plan. We had regained our funding from the city and the province. The museum and the Alexander Henry were open again, and I was the new board chair. The rebuilding process gained pace. We hired a general manager and a curator. We invested in new exhibits. Attendance numbers and revenues ticked steadily upwards. By 2015, the museum was firing on all cylinders again. We will get to the Keewatin eventually. Just bear with me. We were firing on all cylinders again, or so we thought. That year, the federal government informed us that they had deemed our property, by now a National Historic Site, to be surplus to its needs. They were going to sell it out from under us. Once again, we concentrated our minds wonderfully. As per protocol, before listing the property on the open market, the feds offered it to the city for $1. We approached the city and lobbied everyone from the mayor on down with the pitch: please take the property for $1 and flip it back to us for $1. Or if you want to come out on top in that deal, we'll make it $2. This will be a win-win for the city and the museum at no cost to the city. The mayor and the city commissioner responsible at the time, and every single councillor, we had them all come in for walks and talks and sit downs at the museum, jointly and severally. But it was not to be. Before the motion to approve came up for the crucial vote, there was an in-camera session, the dreaded in-camera session, at which the councillors were read the Riot Act by legal counsel. He was concerned that the museum site was a contaminated brownfield. In his now infamous words, he advised that the city should not be in the chain of title to the museum property, quote, not even for 1 nanosecond, unquote. When the motion came to the council floor, it failed. We were shattered. The whole of the downtown Kingston waterfront is a contaminated brownfield. Why were we being singled out? Regardless, the property was listed and sold to the highest bidder, a local developer. By the spring of 2016, he served the museum with an eviction notice. Our 15,000 feet of collections, as well as the Alexander Henry, had to be out in 4 months' time. He emphasized that he was particularly concerned that we might leave the ship behind. Should that happen, his lawyers kindly informed us that the museum directors would be sued jointly and severally for all costs to remove and dispose of the ship. I can assure you, once again, that concentrated our minds wonderfully. Wonderfully. As you can imagine, it is not an easy thing to find a new home for an unwanted museum ship, nor is it an inexpensive thing to dispose of. We learned that the net proceeds from towing the Henry away and selling her for scrap would be significantly negative, very significantly negative. We explored the possibility of sinking her to create a diving reef. This was a big idea from certain quarters, but the cost to strip the ship of all contaminants in order to get environmental approvals were massively prohibitive. Finally, our luck turned. A group in Thunder Bay reached out. They had an attachment to the Henry because she was originally built there and sailed and operated from there, and they wanted her back. They were planning to use the ship to anchor a new transportation museum in Thunder Bay. As you can imagine, we did not play hard to get. With some help from City Hall on towing costs, the move was made and the museum's directors could breathe a huge sigh of relief. Nonetheless, we were adrift, shipless, virtually homeless. We spent the next 3 years in the wilderness, eking out an existence in a postage stamp storefront operation in Portsmouth Olympic Harbor. But we were undaunted. We examined a dozen or more possibilities for a new home. One way or another, though, they all came up short. Then a miracle happened. The developer who owned our former heritage property was having difficulty getting his plans approved by the city. We thought we'd take a long shot and offer to buy the property back from him. He was climbing Mount Everest at the time. Perhaps it was the thin atmosphere. We shall never know. But after initial resistance, he warmed to the idea. And the rest is history. With an extraordinary gift from an extraordinary Kingston philanthropist, we were able to buy back the heritage property we had been evicted from. 3 years had gone by. It was now the fall of 2019. We had the dry dock, the museum pier, and the heritage buildings again. Small detail though, they were completely uninhabitable. There had been an element of what is known as demolition by neglect. During the 3 years, they lay vacant. There was no electricity, no water, no HVAC. All the copper had been conveniently stripped out of the buildings. Everything was smashed and in a shambles. But we were delighted. We were no longer homeless. Our optimism was boundless. We struck a committee to draft a new strategic plan that called for raising more money, a lot of money, to make the buildings habitable again. We found the money and restored all our infrastructure. Not only that, with enormous effort from volunteers, we scraped down and repainted all our structures, inside and out. We even found grant money to replace all the rotten doors and windows, heritage rotten doors and rotten windows, I should say. The museum, it is fair to say, is looking better now than at any time in its history. And if you don't know that, personally, please come down and see it for yourself. It's just a marvel. So we ticked that first strategic objective off the list, job done. But there were others. Any maritime museum worth its salt must have a museum ship. With the departure of the Alexander Henry, we were conspicuously lacking one. We had a gorgeous heritage dry dock, but it was, and still is, empty. So the search was on to find a new museum ship to be the centerpiece of our collections and a main draw for visitors, as the Alexander Henry had been. If you will indulge me, I'm now going to go ask you to rewind, let me rewind this account somewhat. In August of 2016, when we became homeless, a group in Port McNicoll in Georgian Bay approached us. They had what they described as a Titanic-era passenger steamship that they'd been caring for and operating as a tourist attraction since 2012. She was possibly going to be in need of a new home. So this is in 2016. Would we be interested? Given our homeless condition at that time, it was a non-starter. But I was curious. Coincidentally, that August, my partner and I chartered a sailboat to cruise Georgian Bay's majestic North Channel. At the end of the cruise, I suggested to my partner, instead of going straight home, why don't we tack on an extra night in Midland and go see that Titanic-era ship? It's called the SS, but I would have said Keewatin at that time. And so we did. We were very graciously received by Eric Conroy of the Friends of the Keewatin and treated to a personal tour. Within minutes, our heads were spinning and our mouths agape, and I mean within minutes. The ship was stunningly beautiful, a seemingly fully preserved time capsule from the glamorous Edwardian era, replete with a grand mahogany-lined staircase, an exquisitely liveried dining saloon, an elegant ladies' lounge set for high tea, and a soaring engine room, all right out of a movie set. We were smitten. I made a full report to the board at our September meeting on an FYI basis, and we left it at that. We subsequently learned that the Friends of the Keewatin had found a solution that would enable them to keep their ship in Georgian Bay, and we were happy for them. However, in 2019, so now we're back in the property we've reacquired, our heritage dry dock site. In 2019, we heard from the owners of the Keewatin, Skyline Investments. They had sold the property where the ship resided in Port McNicoll, including the wharf. The Friends, a not-for-profit charity set up to preserve and operate the ship, had tried mightily to find an alternative home. They had come up empty-handed. In short, Skyline asked us, would the Marine Museum, now reinstalled at its historic dry dock site, reconsider taking possession of the ship and providing a new permanent home for it? We were interested. A delegation was dispatched to inspect the ship, and we met with Skyline Investments, the owners of the ship. The board decided to take the next step, a complicated, nearly 2-year process to be certified by the Federal Department of Canadian Heritage as qualified to preserve and be the custodians of the Keewatin as Canadian cultural property. This was a necessary condition in order for Skyline to receive a tax benefit from donating the ship. Our museum manager, Doug Cowie, a marine surveyor in his former career, spent months poring over the ship, photographing and cataloging every aspect of its condition. In consultation with experts, he devised an exhaustive restoration and preservation plan. In all, it comprised 36 documents and hundreds of pages. We submitted it to Heritage in September 2020, and many months later, in the fall of 21, they gave us the green light. Meanwhile, as a result of Doug Cowie's exhaustive work, it became apparent that while superficially a well-preserved marvel, the ship was actually in need of many urgent repairs and restorative work. And this would be an ongoing need for the life of the ship. What would it cost, and would the Keewatin ever be viable financially? We struck a due diligence committee to answer those questions. The committee met with and interviewed owners and operators of museum ships elsewhere in Canada and abroad. They gave us invaluable advice. The most important lesson I drew from this exercise was the need to plan for the worst case. Remember what happened to the Alexander Henry, thinking of worst cases. What if, despite all our best intentions, the Keewatin proved to be an unsustainable financial flop, and we had to dispose of it? Plan for that worst case, everyone said. We did our homework and calculated we would need to permanently endow $550,000 to take care of that eventuality. Then we triaged the preservation work that was most urgent, came up with an extensive shopping list of major repairs that would have to be attended to before we could take delivery of the ship. Things like the leaking promenade deck that was the source of continuing water damage in many of the cabins. Likewise, there was serious leakage and ongoing damage in the elegant ladies' lounge. The list went on. We added many zeros to our budget to take care of these kinds of things. Based on our business case research and projected cash flows, we also realized we would need to allow for deficits in the first 1 or 2 years of operation, and there would be a major expense to create a proper onshore reception and interpretive center for the ship. More zeros. In due course, our committee made its final report and recommendation to the board. We should acquire the Keewatin if, and only if, we raised $5 million to make it financially sustainable. The board voted in favor. Thanks to remarkable generosity from Friends of the Museum, we found the funds. And on January 3rd, 2023, we accepted Skyline's donation of the SS Keewatin to the museum. As soon as the ice broke in Georgian Bay last spring, I'm sure you all heard about it, we had her towed to Heddle Shipyards in Hamilton for major repairs, and that is where she has been to date. The tow became a media sensation, far beyond our expectations. As the interviews and enthusiastic commentaries on social media began to pile up, it dawned on us that we had a larger story on our hands than even the most optimistic among us had anticipated. The Keewatin was going to be, and is, a truly Canadian story, not just a Kingston one or a Great Lakes Museum one. This will be the case even more so next week when the ship is due to arrive at her final home in our historic dry dock on Monday, October 23rd. You are all invited, of course. It will be a once-in-a-lifetime spectacle. And I have breaking news. We're aiming now for a 1 o'clock arrival time. So that's this coming Monday, 1 o'clock at the museum, 55 Ontario Street. If you don't know it, it's right downtown on the waterfront. It's weather dependent, of course, so please stay tuned, particularly to our website. That's the best source for last minute updates. So before you head down, check on our website. So what is it about this ship, the SS Keewatin, that makes her so special and such a prize for the museum, Kingston, and Canada? I warned you off the top that I make no pretensions to being an historian. So please don't hold me too closely to the following observations that I think are worthy of your attention. There were some 3,000 Titanic-style passenger steamships built during the great era of steam, and there are only 3 left in the entire world. The SS Nomadic that served as a tender to the Titanic. It's in Belfast, built in 1911. The TSS Earnslaw, a passenger ferry still operating in New Zealand. That's from 1912. And the SS Keewatin, a classic passenger cargo liner built in Scotland in 1907. So the Keewatin is the oldest and by far the biggest and most glamorous. Here is some of her story. Her name pronounced Keewatin in Cree or Ojibwe, that means north wind. She was built for CP ships of the CPR as one of 5 CP ships that established the Upper Great Lakes Fleet. Soon after, CP would extend their famous passenger fleets into the Atlantic and Pacific. But it all began with the original 5 ships in the Upper Great Lakes Fleet. She was designed and constructed on the River Clyde in Glasgow, Scotland, at the Fairfield Shipping and Engineering Company. They were the preeminent shipbuilders of their day. CP wanted only the best. On her maiden voyage, the Keewatin sailed across the Atlantic and arrived in Montreal in September 1907. She unloaded her cargo and sailed back downstream to the Davie shipyard in Lévis, Quebec, for a surprising operation. At 350 feet in length, she had purposely been designed to be separated into 2. Only in that condition was she able to pass through the shorter locks in the St. Lawrence and Welland canals. She was re-riveted back together on Lake Erie at a shipyard in Buffalo, New York, and then delivered on Christmas Day to a yard at Owen Sound, Georgian Bay. There, Canadian artisans and tradesmen took over the job of all the finishing work on the ship, the plumbing and electrical and the gorgeous woodwork and installation of beautiful stained glass skylights from Murano, Italy, and so on. Their workmanship was of the highest standard, and the fruits of it are almost 100% intact on the ship today. In the grand staircase, the dining saloon, the flower pot well, the ladies' lounge, the ballroom, the sumptuous staterooms and cabins to accommodate 286 passengers, and throughout the ship. The Keewatin was put into service in October 1908, making her first run to Port Arthur with cargo and passengers. The CPR, in partnership with the federal government, was in the business of promoting immigration to populate the newly formed provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan. Together, they canvassed aggressively in Eastern Europe, in places like Poland, Germany, and Ukraine, enticing prospects with the promise of free transportation on CP ships across the Atlantic, free or next to free train travel to Georgian Bay, the same on the Keewatin, and her sister ship, the Assiniboia, to Port Arthur, and the same from the Lakehead by rail to free plots of land along the rail line out west. The whole notion was to establish farming settlements on rich prairie soil as quickly as possible, and to discourage the Americans from any northward expansion ideas. It was nation building and it worked. Today, we also consider the downside of that mass migration and settlement story, and that will be part of the Keewatin story that we interpret at the museum. In the early years, the ships carried mostly immigrants and supplies out west and returned with bulk cargoes of grain and minerals, raw goods. As the immigration wave receded, the Keewatin and other steamships gradually transitioned to being purveyors of luxury passenger travel. This was before the Trans-Canada Highway and before affordable air travel. If you wanted to treat your family to an exotic vacation or plan a romantic honeymoon, it was hard to beat a cruise along the spectacularly scenic shores of Georgian Bay and Lake Superior. The ship's ample cargo bays continued to ferry both raw and finished goods in both directions. Life was good for the Keewatin's owners. It was good for the Keewatin's owners, the CPR, for the crew and community in Port McNicoll, built to serve her, for the passengers and for the shippers. But all good things must come to an end. The age of affordable air and automobile travel did indeed arrive, and slowly but inevitably, the Keewatin's magic began to fade. In November 1965, CP ships officially retired her. She was put on the market, but there were no takers other than the scrapyard. Before the yard could take delivery, though, R.J. Peterson and his wife Diane in Michigan heard about the ship. They had a marina up the Kalamazoo River. Improbably and whimsically, they decided they would save the ship and operate it as a tourist attraction and event space. They would bill it as the mini Titanic. They wrangled a deal, found the money, and that is where the SS Keewatin resided from 1968 until 2012. By then, the Petersons were elderly and could find no successors to carry on their project. The then CEO of Skyline Investments learned of the Keewatin's uncertain fate and saw a potential match for a waterside real estate development in Port McNicoll. The community was agog. Skyline struck a deal, and in 2012, to much fanfare, the ship was towed back to its original home in Port McNicoll. Sadly for Port McNicoll, in the ensuing years, Skyline found they couldn't make a go of their real estate project. As alluded to, they sold their waterfront site and needed to find a new taker for the ship. The friends of the Keewatin and other parties did their best to win the confidence of Canadian heritage and do a deal with Skyline, but to no avail. So in the end, here we are, a few days away from the Great Lakes Museum, becoming the new home of the SS Keewatin. It's a great privilege and responsibility to take on the stewardship of the Keewatin. As Diane Peterson said years ago, you cannot own history. We are just taking care of it. But circling back to an earlier comment, the question must be asked, has the Great Lakes Museum taken on the role of the greater fool in this chain of ownership? I sincerely think not and hope not. We have conducted a prodigious amount of due diligence and business case analysis. We have done our best to behave as the proverbial prudent investor would, putting many safeguards in place so as not to put the museum's precious physical, financial, and moral capital at undue risk. But there are no guarantees. In essence, what we are undertaking is entrepreneurial to its core. Yes, we are building a not-for-profit cultural enterprise, but it will only succeed if it is financially viable as a business. The only way to find out if our calculations and assumptions have been prudent enough in that regard is to receive the ship and start to operate it. And so here we are, about to embark on that voyage. Personally, knowing the outstanding caliber and commitment of our staff, our board, our volunteers, and our friends and partners in the community, I'm all in on success. Yes, inevitably there will be unpleasant surprises and adversity along the way, but we shall concentrate wonderfully as needed, and we shall prevail. The Great Lakes Museum, with its Titanic-era SS Keewatin, is destined to become one of the crown jewels in Kingston's tourism economy. We'll be right up there with the Kingston Penitentiary Tours and Fort Henry. That's the goal, and it is eminently achievable. Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. And that concludes this address. I'd be happy to take some questions.
Questions.
We have a few slides we can put up quickly.
Beautiful, isn't it? Well, the folks that are in Zoomers out there, they're looking at a gorgeous image of the ladies' lounge.
That's the ladies' lounge. Yeah.
Right. So that's what they're looking at.
Here's the ballroom, the aft ballroom. Not a particularly
Looks good
pleasing
here.
shot, but it's okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Here's a little look at a cabin. And that's what we have. Yeah. There's much more. You can Google or go to our website. It's easy to find.
They sent me about 30 pictures, but his talk was his priority over the pictures. You'll see them.
Chris, that was really a wonderful lecture. If you were selling cars, I'd have my checkbook out by now.
Really, really nice.
And certainly, we walk our dogs every day in Fort Henry, and I know where we'll be on Monday afternoon, the weather permitting. Really a thrilling moment for the city. So thank you. And any questions, please?
No, my question was, in your long-term plans, will you ultimately make the ship in a dry dock? Will the dry dock be dry? Like, will you prop it up on blocks or whatever they do to keep it out of the water and therefore preserve it longer or something like that?
That's my dream.
Okay.
All we need is maybe another $5 million for that. You'd have to design not just a very elaborate cradle system to hold it properly, but there's an unfortunate syndrome in old ships, which we've been apprised of. I think all ships are constructed this way. They're engineered to be physically, what's the word? To have physical integrity, structural integrity, with the force of the water on all sides. If you take away that buttressing support, just gazillions of pounds of pressure, then you've got to develop an elaborate bracing system. And we've seen this with other museum ships and other places in the world. It can be done, but it's just dollars. But it's really the proper way to see a ship when you've got a dry dock. The dry dock is much more exciting. It's a visual marvel. It's stepped, terraced limestone. And it's in impeccable condition, that dry dock, once it's drained. So yes, that's the long-term vision.
Just find 5 guys, each with $1 million.
Yes.
What's the long-term engagement for people who visit this ship? Would they be able to stay on the ship perhaps at one point? Would they be able to order dinner? Something like that? Now, I did.
Yes, these are longer. Those were the medium. Having dinner on the ship, we hope maybe within a couple of years, and even sooner than that, catered events and things. but actually having a functioning kitchen and all the indoor or on-ship plumbing and toilets and all of that stuff, it'll take a while, but it needs to be part of the plan, yes. I don't think we would ever run it as a hotel again. I've never heard of that being a moneymaker. The Queen Mary on Long Beach is not making money as a floating hotel.
The question is, will you be taking tickets or tours of the ship?
Absolutely. We will be opening the ship next May. She's a work site right now. She's still being worked on, and we will continue working this fall and over the winter. And then she's got to be staged. So if you saw a picture there of that, what I've described as a stunningly beautiful dining saloon, but it's not looking stunningly beautiful right now. So all that staging will be done in the first quarter, and then we'll open for business in the second quarter in the spring. And for I think an admission price of, I'm not sure, it'll depend, but let's say around $40, $38, $40. That will get you into the museum, and you need to see that new interpretive center that's under development right now, because you need to have the context for the ship. And then when you're on the ship, you're on your voyage, and you're not going to read all that background, some of which I tried to impart to you this evening. But a lot of that and more will be in this welcome center on shore. So that'll all be part of what you get for your ticket, and then the on-board tour as well. And as you can imagine, it's such a big ship that there will be a standard tour. Then you could add on a premium engine room tour, or the go up to the bridge would be another premium tour, that kind of thing.
People will want to get married on it.
Yes, absolutely. Special events, including weddings, will definitely be on the menu. No, but we're looking for volunteers. So come on down. There's a place to sign up as a volunteer at the museum, and there are lots of exciting things to do, as you can imagine. Just lots and lots of fun things associated with the ship. So both cadres will grow exponentially, the volunteer side and the employed side. This is, I think the Henry was maybe 180 feet, and this is double that, basically. This is a football field in length, a football field. It is. It's more than you think it is. Yeah, I swam it this summer, I can tell you.
Chris, you made the point that this will join a trio, or in fact with the Murney Tower, a quartet of museums right on the shoreline. And I was struck when you mentioned the tour of the penitentiary, which when it was opened, 3, 4, 5 years ago, people said, well, this will last a year. There'll be a surge of interest. Well, it hasn't. It's gone on. There are queues there every year.
Yeah.
And I think your planning indicates that you'll have the same success.
Yeah. We probably will have a huge local contingent of curious Kingstonians who will say, well, let's go see it. It's in our backyard and it's pretty exotic. And then you might think, well, that'll give you a big bump in the first year, but how are you going to sustain that? But the model at the Penn Tours is a good one for that.
Yes. Yeah.
They did have a huge bump initially, but their steady rate is maybe 55,000 people a year. It's extraordinary.
Would you be able to sustain it right through the winter as well, the tourism aspect of it?
Only if we drain the dry dock and we cover. So yeah, so there's a ship in Bristol called the SS Great Britain, and they have a dry dock. And what they've done is drain the dry dock and then put in some wobbly glass that looks like it's the water surface on from the dry dock, but actually it's a roof. So it gives a lovely effect, but then you can have a climate controlled area underneath, and you can operate. Yes.
This is one of those occasions where everyone has suggestions for you. Of course, have a price tag, but as things unfold, one thing that struck me, the Fort Henry Guard provides the example of putting students together in a group as historical interpreters. So eventually on the ship, you could have a student dressed up as an engine, an artificer in the
That's
engine,
part of the vision.
one guy as captain.
Definitely.
And that brings, in my experience, brings a site alive.
Yes,
But that's down the road.
Yeah.
You've got the initial
yeah,
enthusiasm.
we're selling experience.
Yes.
Experience.
Well, Chris, this has been really a wonderful talk. You mentioned a number of times the parallel with the Titanic, and so we'll leave you with wishing you all the success in the world as the Titanic had, with one big exception.
No icebergs, please. No icebergs.
Thank you so much, and as a token of our appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
May I remind you that our next lecture comes on the 15th of November, a Wednesday evening, and we'll be joined that night by a Queen's doctoral student, Caitlin McDonald, who is doing a thesis on what is called dark tourism. That is, and you think about it in any town, haunted night walks, Fort Fright up at Fort Henry, the acting out and engaging with mythic past in an area, ghosts, etc. She's interested in how that relates in an authentic way to the telling of heritage and history. Does it promote it? Does it pervert it, etc.? Dark tourism. So before the lecture, I expect all of you to head up to Fort Henry and go to Fort Fright, so you'll get in the mood for this. That's November the 15th, 7 o'clock back here and on Zoom. Thank you very much and good night.